This section of the 2022 A200 will cover an incident with potential. That was a near midair collision that occurred on the 21st of June. The near midair occurred at Cedar City Airport, which was an uncontrolled airport, so keep that in mind as we go forward. Located at Cedar City, Utah, and the time of occurrence was 1930 local time. The Aero Commander 690B was under Forest Service operational control, and it was on a BLM exclusive use contract. And then again, the general aviation portion of this involved a Honda jet, November 420 Kilo Alpha. So in this presentation, we're going to start with a lot of background information. We don't ever want to assume everybody has terminology or the same level of understanding, but these following slides will give us enough background information to have a decent picture of what was occurring during this incident with potential. So we'll start with basic airport traffic pattern terminology. Again, it's either new information or a review for some folks. So the keys for this particular IWP are to look at what's depicted in the chart as the crosswind leg of the airport traffic pattern, the base leg on the left-hand side there, and then final, which is annotated by number 3. So just keep those in mind as we move forward. So some definitions that'll help us, again, with our creating a picture of what happened as we go forward. The first is final, or what's sometimes called final approach. This is a flight path in the direction of landing along the extended runway centerline from the base leg to the runway. It's recommended that pilots complete their turn to final at least 1/4 of a mile from the runway, and that's an FAA definition. Additionally, we have short final, and although there's no formal definition necessarily for short final, it's widely considered to be the last section of the final approach leg, during which the aircraft is ready to land and is committed to touching down. And so in some circles, you'll talk to some pilots, and they may informally consider this to be somewhere around the 1/4 mile distance mark to the runway threshold. Again, keeping in mind that's different for different types of aircraft, different pilots, different techniques for flying. But again, it's that last section of the final approach when the aircraft is pretty much committed to land. And finally, near midair collision. You'll see it in the following slides as an NMAC. That's an incident associated with operation of an aircraft in which possibility of collision occurs as a result of proximity of less than 500 feet to another aircraft, or, and this is the key part here, or a report from a pilot or flight crew that states a collision hazard existed. So we'll keep these definitions in mind as we move forward as well. Now, it was mentioned that the airport where this IWP occurred was a non-towered airport. That was mentioned at the beginning. So if we look to the FAA advisory circular on non-towered airport flight operations, again, we'll get a little more additional background information that'll help us understand as events unfolded what was going on. So in the definitions section of that advisory circular, there's a lot of information in there, and we cut and pasted some of it out here that's pertinent to this. Airports without control towers or airports with control towers that are not operating. Those are what's commonly referred to as non-towered, or potentially a part-time towered airport, but in this case, non-towered. Another term commonly used that we'll use interchangeably is uncontrolled airport. So with those, there's a common traffic advisory frequency, or a CTAF, is a frequency designed for the purpose of carrying out airport advisory practices while operating to or from an airport without an operating control tower. So we'll keep those in mind. So you see the airport diagram on the right, and again, we've depicted the landing direction that was chosen by both aircraft. It was landing on runway 20, which is depicted with the yellow arrow on the right. So when we talk about straight-in landings, again, back to the advisory circular, the FAA encourages pilots to use the standard traffic pattern when arriving or departing a non-towered airport when the control tower is not operating. So particularly when other aircraft are observed, or there's other traffic observed when operating from an unfamiliar airport. However, there are occasions where a pilot can choose to execute a straight-in approach for landing when not intending to enter the traffic pattern, such as a visual approach executed as part of a termination of an instrument approach. So in this definition, in this incident, that was what the Honda jet, the general aviation Honda jet, was doing. So a little more information from the advisory circular on straight-in landings. Pilots should clearly communicate on the CTAF and coordinate maneuvering for and execution of the landing with other traffic so as not to disrupt the flow of other aircraft. Therefore, pilots operating in the traffic pattern should be alerted all times to aircraft that might be executing those straight-in landings, particularly when flying a base leg prior to turning final. So again, keep this in mind as we move forward with the unfolding of this scenario. Now, when considering instrument flight rules traffic at these non-towered airports, pilots conducting instrument approaches should be particularly alert for other aircraft in the pattern so as to avoid interrupting the flow of that traffic, and should bear in mind they do not have a priority over other VFR traffic. Taking a look at recommended traffic advisory practices, all traffic within a 10-mile radius of a non-towered airport should continuously monitor and communicate as appropriate on the designated CTAF until leaving the area or until clear of the movement area. Further, after first monitoring the frequency for other traffic present, passing within 10 miles of the airport, self-announcing of position and intention should occur between 8 and 10 miles from the airport upon arrival. So let's take a quick look at the Aeronautical Information Manual and see what it says about non-towered airport flight operations and recommended communication procedures. Aircraft inbound to land should broadcast position and intentions 10 miles out, entering downwind, base, and final, and when leaving the runway, and those are on those VFR aircraft. Aircraft that are flying instruments inbound on those approaches should include departing the final approach fix or on final approach segment inbound. All right, so now that we have all that good background information, let's turn to this specific scenario. So the General Aviation Honda Jet was established on an instrument approach to runway 20 at Cedar City, depicted by the red arrow in the map on the right. Additional traffic at Cedar City included 2 other aircraft that were maneuvering on the ground, but they were communicating position and intention on the CTAF. There were also 2 helicopters established on instrument approaches, communicating positions on CTAF, and had already deconflicted with the Honda Jet. So the next few slides are going to have some time hacks, and then the aircraft that's talking, and then the statement that was made on the CTAF. So there were other aircraft, keep in mind, that were communicating on the CTAF, but what we've done here for the sake of simplicity and just focusing on the IWP, we've only included the communications that occurred between the 2 IWP involved aircraft. So the sequence of events in the comms, as stated here, you can see the time hack at 1907. The Honda Jet on the CTAF announces 14-mile final for runway 20 descending through 11,400. And then at 1908, the Honda Jet again states its position as 11-mile final 20. At 1909, the Honda Jet states 8-mile final runway 20. And then at 1909 and about 40 extra seconds states just over, and this part was unreadable, on the ILS 20, we're looking for traffic over the VOR. So from the tower tapes, here's the first communication from our other aircraft involved, the Twin Commander. At 1911, states, we are just going over midfield for a right downwind 20, and you can see that depicted in blue on the map on the right. And then about 7 seconds later, the Honda Jet states short final 20, and you can see them again, their rough position depicted in red. So roughly 30 seconds after that, the Twin Commander states on CTAF, just turning right base to final, full stop. And then 8 to 7 seconds after that, the Honda Jet announces, Honda Jet 420 Kilo Alpha, short final 20, see an aircraft, are you guys turning final? That was followed shortly after, at 19:13 and 5 seconds, the Honda Jet states, Commander move off, Twin Commander move off. And then a few seconds after that, the Honda Jet states, Twin Commander, just landing at Cedar City. We want your name and number. This is 0 Kilo Alpha. We were on short final and you just cut in front of us cold. So keep in mind, both aircraft ended up on short final within approximately 0.3 of a nautical mile, which equates to about 1,800 feet of separation. And you can see their approximate locations noted in the map on the right. So obviously a lot going on here in a very short period of time. So taking all that in, let's turn to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, or AOPA. Let's look at their safety advisory publication on operations at non-towered airports, and we're just going to pull out some highlights from that document. And again, referencing the IWP in the scenario that we just unfolded. So it states mid-air collisions are the primary hazard associated with flying at non-towered airports. Most mid-air collisions occur in clear weather within 5 miles of an airport and below 3,000 feet, which is where aircraft congregate, as hasn't happened in this situation. Most collisions occur on final approach and generally when a faster aircraft overtakes a slower one. Additionally, there is a tendency for pilots to lock on to the touchdown zone. Especially if they're on, as we discussed, short final, they're preparing to land the aircraft. It's imperative to continue scanning and listening for traffic as we slide down final, clear both sides of the final approach path. It further states, be especially careful to scan and listen for traffic on base or final. Once turned toward the runway, it is difficult to see behind the aircraft. At non-towered airports, you will hear advisories on a CTAF, but the responsibility for collision avoidance, sequencing, and knowing the local procedures lies solely with the pilot. And finally, no matter what size pattern your aircraft requires, you should follow traffic ahead of you in the pattern. This means that faster aircraft may need to slow down and extend downwind slightly to allow sufficient clearance from slower traffic. So just a few of the lessons learned here. Let's look at crew resource management. In the Forest Service, we obviously use the 7 skills crew resource management model. So these aren't all of the skills. There's just a few examples that were present in this mishap, and as you review this, you could probably think of more. But just a couple of examples. Situational awareness, complete visual search of aircraft locations in the pattern. Utilize all personnel in the aircraft to do that visual search. Factor in those differing speeds when varying types of aircraft are in the pattern, as in this case we had a general aviation jet versus a propeller-driven aircraft. Further, under the skill of communications, verbal communication of aircraft locations in the pattern, especially at an uncontrolled airport. And an example might be, hey, we see you on short final. We're extending downwind leg to allow for spacing. Under assertiveness, it's just a willingness to tell or request other aircraft in the pattern what you or they should do. And an example of this might be, we're on short final. Can you extend downwind? And finally, under adaptability and flexibility, it's just a willingness to adjust the plan. What can you or we do in the aircraft to accommodate that flow of traffic and reduce risk to as low as reasonably possible? So this is an excerpt from a U.S. Naval Aviation Safety Bulletin. And so when we look at the chart, the column on the left is the time required to cover distance at a given speed. And in this chart, it depicts a column with 600 miles an hour and 360 miles an hour, the distance, and then the number of seconds it takes to cover that distance. And so keep in mind, the speeds depicted here are the combined speeds of both aircraft. So the column on the right is reaction time and kind of breaks down how long it takes to actually react to another aircraft once you've seen the object, all the way down to the lag time from control input to the time the aircraft reacts. And so in this incident, the crew of the Honda jet did a great job communicating their position, as well as maintaining situational awareness to alter the landing and deciding to go around to avoid a potential mid-air collision. And finally, we leave you with just some additional resources. We mentioned the Aeronautical Information Manual, but there's also chart supplements. There's great information from Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association at the link included in the slide. And then the FAA provides a lot of great resources as well. So this concludes this section of the A200 covering the incident with potential near mid-air collision that occurred on the 21st of June. If you have any further questions, please contact your Regional Aviation Safety Officer.